Consider this your notice to vacate.
You can't do this. This house belongs to me.
Richard slid the cream-colored envelope across the Christmas brunch table as if he were offering Elena another cinnamon roll, not in order to vanish from the only place that had ever felt like home. "You have 10 days to leave Callahan House," he said. The words dropped into the room like ice into warm water. Everything else still looked beautiful. Pine garlands curled around the banister. Candlelight trembled against the old window glass. Snow pressed softly against the panes. The air smelled of butter, coffee, and orange zest. Christmas should have felt gentle. Instead, it turned sharp. Elena stared at the envelope without touching it. For one suspended beat, she thought this had to be a joke, some cruel performance. Richard would walk back with an awkward laugh. Then she saw her mother's face. Vivian Hart was smiling. Not warmly. Not kindly. Calmly. Like she had rehearsed this moment and had finally reached the part she liked best. "Mason needs a real chance to rebuild," Vivian said, folding her napkin with precise fingers. "You have been here long enough, Elena. It is time to think practically." Across the table, Mason leaned back in Grandma Rose's chair as if he had been born entitled to it. One hand wrapped around Rose's old blue mug, the one with the chipped handle. That small detail hit Elena harder than Richard's voice. Mason had never cared about this house. Not the drafty halls. Not the salt-stained windows. Not the endless repairs. But now he sat at its heart like a man already measuring the curtains for his own life. Elena opened the envelope at last. The paper was thick. The language was colder than the winter outside. Legal phrases. Deadlines. Threats. It looked official enough to frighten someone into surrender. She lifted her gaze. "This is not a court order." Richard's tone never changed. "We are trying to avoid one." "We." That one word landed like a slap. Because Elena knew what it meant. It meant what it had always meant in this family. Mason wanted something. Everyone else was expected to bend. Mason failed. Someone else paid. Mason broke trust, money, promises, and still the room tilted toward him as if he were the one most in need of protection. Elena looked at her mother. "You knew about this." Vivian did not blink. "Of course I did." Outside, wind pushed snow against the glass. The inn let out a low wooden creak, old and stubborn, like a body refusing to kneel. Callahan House had survived storms stronger than this family. Grandma Rose had built its warmth room by room, season by season. And when age hollowed her strength, Elena had been the one who stayed. She had changed sheets with numb hands in winter. She had patched leaks in the roof during spring rain. She had baked bread for guests, balanced invoices at midnight, polished railings, carried laundry, cleaned fireplaces, and sat beside Rose through long evenings when breath came thin and memory came bright. She had kept this place alive. Mason had come twice in Rose's final year. Once to ask for money. Once to leave angry when she refused. Now he smiled like a man arriving to collect a prize. "This place needs vision," he said. "I can turn it into something bigger. More profitable. More modern." Elena almost laughed. The sound rose bitter in her throat and died there. "You mean after I did the work?" His mouth curved. "I mean after somebody competent takes over." Vivian clicked her tongue softly. "Do not make this emotional. Your grandmother indulged you because she felt sorry for you. That does not make you the future of this property." The sentence cut deep because it knew where to land. It struck years of smaller wounds. School concerts where Mason's mediocrity had been praised like genius. Holidays arranged around his moods. A lifetime of being treated as dependable but secondary, useful but never chosen first. But under the sting, something steadier rose. That was always their mistake. They looked at Elena and saw quiet. They saw patience. They saw the one who stayed and mistook staying for weakness. Richard nudged the envelope toward her. 10 days is generous. Elena did not move. By what right? Before Richard could answer, Mason leaned forward. By the right of family. By the right of common sense. And by the right that half of Cedar Hollow already knows I am taking over. Silence. Elena turned to him slowly. What did you just say? He shrugged, too pleased with himself to stop. People talk. I may have mentioned plans. Investors prefer certainty. There it was. Not pressure. Strategy. They had already been telling people the inn was his. Building a version of the future where Elena was the obstacle, not the owner. Creating momentum. Shame. Social pressure. If she fought back, she would look bitter. Difficult. Unreasonable. Vivian shot Mason a warning look. Richard's jaw hardened. Too late. Elena had seen enough. You promised away this house before you even tried to take it from me, she said. No one answered. The doorbell rang. The sound cracked through the room. Elena stood first. She crossed the foyer and opened the front door to a rush of white air and winter light. Naomi Pierce stood on the porch in a dark wool coat, snow caught in her hair, a tin of ginger biscuits under one arm and a sealed envelope in her gloved hand. Her eyes met Elena's face and sharpened at once. She understood. Something had broken in this house. I came to save Christmas brunch, Naomi said softly. Then she lifted the envelope. And this was dropped at my office for immediate delivery. It is addressed to Richard Hart. Behind Elena, a chair scraped hard against the floor. Richard had stood up too fast. Elena turned and saw it. For the first time that morning, fear moved across his face. And deep inside her, beneath the hurt, beneath the rage, something bright and powerful began to rise. They thought she was the girl they could corner at her own table. They had forgotten whose house this really was. Richard did not take the envelope at first. He stared at it as though the seal itself had teeth. The dining room had changed without moving. The candles still burned. The coffee still steamed. Snow still feathered the windows. But the balance of the room had shifted. A moment ago, Elena had been the one under pressure, the one expected to fold. Now something invisible had turned, and everyone felt it. Naomi stepped inside, bringing with her a breath of cold air and the clean scent of snow. She set the tin of ginger biscuits on the console table as if she had entered an ordinary holiday gathering, then held the envelope out again. It was marked urgent, she said. Her voice was light, but her eyes were not. Legal courier. Signature required. Richard took it with stiff fingers. Elena watched his face as he broke the seal. The color drained from it line by line. His mouth tightened. His shoulders lost their easy arrogance. He read the first page once, then again, faster, as if speed might change the words. Vivian rose halfway from her chair. Richard? He did not answer. Mason snatched the papers from his hand. What is this supposed to be? Naomi reached into her coat and removed a second folded document. That is a formal notice from the estate administrator's office. This, she said, lifting the second paper, is a certified copy of the non-contest acknowledgement signed after Rose Callahan's will was executed. For a second, no one breathed. Elena felt the room narrow around Naomi's voice. Mason laughed first, but it came out too sharp. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, Naomi said. Your mother, your stepfather, and you accepted distribution from the family trust under one condition. None of you could challenge Elena Hart's ownership, occupancy, or control of Callahan House. Any attempt to pressure, misrepresent, intimidate, or fabricate a claim against her activates immediate review and possible forfeiture. The word forfeiture landed like an axe. Vivian's hand flew to her throat. That is ridiculous. We are family. Naomi looked at her with a calm so crisp it felt merciless. The document does not make an exception for family. Elena stood very still, but inside her heart was striking hard against her ribs. She had known the inn was hers. Rose had made that clear. But this was bigger than ownership. This was protection. Deliberate, sharp, prepared protection. Her grandmother had not simply trusted her. She had seen the future and armored it. Richard found his voice at last. This is a distortion. We made no formal challenge. We were discussing an internal arrangement. Naomi's gaze did not move. An internal arrangement does not include serving a false eviction threat at Christmas brunch. Mason threw the paper onto the table. False according to whom? According to the law, Naomi said. The room went silent again. Elena looked at the pages lying open across the white cloth. She saw official letterhead. Stamped signatures. Language too exact to charm, too clean to twist. Richard had built his whole performance on confidence, on the old family habit of making her doubt herself before she could resist. But paper had its own voice, and this paper was not afraid of him. Vivian turned toward Elena, and the softness in her face cracked. You did this. Elena almost smiled. No. Grandma Rose did. The words cut deeper than a scream could have. Mason shoved back his chair. You think this proves something? She was old. Sick. People get manipulated. That one hit Elena clean in the chest. For a moment, the room blurred. She saw Rose at the kitchen island in her thick cardigan, writing notes in the margin of a reservation book. Rose laughing softly when a storm knocked the power out and guests had to eat by candlelight. Rose pressing a warm teacup into Elena's hands one winter night and saying, in that low steady voice, never trust the people who call greed practicality. They always expect kindness to apologize for itself. Elena lifted her chin. She was clearer than anyone in this room. Mason's jaw flexed. He hated when she answered without shaking. Naomi placed one more sheet on the table. There is also a preliminary advisory from the administrator. Because of this incident, all pending trust disbursements to the Hart family are now subject to review. Richard looked up sharply. Review is not forfeiture. No, Naomi said. Not yet. The words chilled the room more than the wind outside. Elena saw the calculation hit all of them at once. This had never been only about pride. It was money. It was always money. Mason's failed venture. Richard's habit of dressing ambition as order. Vivian's need to preserve appearance at any cost. They had not come here for justice. They had come because they believed Elena was cheaper to break than the future they wanted to buy. Mason turned on Richard. You told me this was handled. Richard's face hardened. Lower your voice. No, Mason snapped. You said the paperwork was weak. You said she would panic and leave before this got messy. There it was. Not grief. Not fairness. Strategy. Vivian shot both men a furious look, not because they had done wrong, but because they had done it badly. In that instant Elena saw all three of them with a terrible, clarifying brightness. Her mother was afraid, Richard was cornered, and Mason was the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who became reckless the second humiliation touched him. Naomi stepped closer to Elena's side. She did not touch her, but the loyalty in her presence felt stronger than a hand. Then the front door opened again. Footsteps crossed the foyer. Slow. Measured. Heavy with purpose. A man. In a charcoal coat appeared at the dining room entrance, carrying a slim leather file and the kind of expression that belonged to someone who had spent years cleaning up the wreckage of other people's lies. Adrian Cole. He let his gaze pass over the table, the papers, the faces, the untouched brunch cooling beneath candlelight. Then he looked at Richard. This matter, he said quietly, ceased being a family misunderstanding the moment someone tried to manufacture consent. The silence after that was so complete Elena could hear the old and breathing around them. And for the first time since the envelope slid across the table, fear no longer lived on her side of the room. Adrian Cole did not raise his voice, yet the room seemed to tighten around every word he spoke. This matter ceased being a family misunderstanding the moment someone tried to manufacture consent. Mason gave a short, bitter laugh, but it sounded forced now. That is a dramatic way to describe a private disagreement. Adrian stepped fully into the dining room and laid his leather file on the table with deliberate care. He did not sit. He did not remove his coat. He carried himself like a man who had not come to negotiate, only to identify damage. It becomes more than private, he said, when forged paperwork, false claims of occupancy, and coercive pressure are used against a lawful owner. Elena felt the words move through her like a current. Forged. False. Lawful owner. Each one restored something the morning had tried to strip from her. Vivian straightened, pulling dignity around herself like a shawl. You are speaking in accusations. I am speaking in facts, Adrian replied. He opened the file. The sound of paper sliding free was small, almost gentle, but it had the force of a blade leaving its sheath. He placed one document in front of Richard, one in front of Mason, one in front of Vivian, then turned the final page toward Elena. Her breath caught. It was a printed copy of an email. Attached beneath it was a scanned memorandum carrying her name in a signature that looked almost right. Almost. The angle was wrong. The pressure too even. The ending too neat. It was her name, but it did not belong to her hand. A cold wave ran through her body. I never signed that, she said. No, Adrian answered. Mason leaned forward, eyes hard. Anybody could fake anything on paper. Adrian looked at him without blinking. Which is exactly why the estate office tracks versions, metadata, timestamps, and points of origin. Richard's face lost what little color it had regained. For the first time, he no longer looked offended. He looked exposed. Adrian touched the email with one finger. This was sent from an account linked to Richard Hart's business office. It claims Elena agreed in principle to shared access and possible operational transfer of Callahan House. It was circulated to 2 outside parties. Elena's pulse thudded once, hard. Outside parties, she asked. Adrian nodded. A private lender and a hospitality consultant. Mason's jaw tightened so sharply she thought his teeth might crack. There it was, at last, without disguise. They had not simply planned to pressure her. They had already begun building a future in which the inn could be leveraged, packaged, sold, or borrowed against. Her home had become a number in someone else's scheme before she even knew a war had started. Vivian spoke quickly now, her composure fraying at the edges. You cannot expect us to believe Richard meant fraud. People use drafts all the time. People discuss possibilities. Adrian turned to her. A possibility is not consent. A discussion is not a signature. And pressure inside a family does not become less serious because it is wrapped in polite language. The candles burned lower. Coffee cooled in untouched cups. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and stress. Elena looked at the false signature again and remembered her grandmother's hands. Rose's fingers had grown thin near the end, but never uncertain. She signed every check, every supplier note, every card to the staff with firm strokes, as if writing were a way of standing upright in the world. Rose had hated falseness in all forms. False praise. False urgency. False love. Adrian drew out one more envelope from the file, heavier than the rest, sealed with the estate mark. The entire room seemed to lean toward it. This, he said, is a directive left by Rose Callahan under sealed instruction. It was to remain unopened unless Elena Hart faced coercion, deception, or intimidation regarding Callahan House. Silence dropped hard and deep. Elena stared at the seal. For a moment, grief rose so suddenly it nearly bent her. Rose had known. Somewhere in the quiet place where wisdom lives beyond sentiment, her grandmother had seen this coming. She had imagined Elena at a table like this, outnumbered, cornered, expected to surrender. And she had prepared for her anyway. Adrian broke the seal. Paper unfolded with a dry whisper. He read aloud. If this letter has been opened, then the child I trusted most has been forced to defend what was already given to her in love and uncertainty. Let there be no confusion. Callahan House belongs to Elena because she preserved its soul when others only counted its value. She did not inherit this place by accident, pity, or convenience. She earned it in patience, labor, and loyalty. No one moved. No one breathed. Mason's face twisted first. That is opinion, not law. But his voice had gone thin. Adrian continued. Any person who attempts to frighten, shame, or outmaneuver her from that house proves by action why they were never meant to hold it. If they call their greed practicality, believe the greed. The words struck the center of Elena's chest so precisely that she almost swayed. Her grandmother. Even now. Still speaking. Still shielding her. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, blinking fast. Vivian looked as if she had been slapped in public. Richard's expression turned rigid, the look of a man discovering that the dead had arranged consequences he could not intimidate. Adrian folded the letter with care. The estate will now proceed under heightened review, he said. Any further interference with Elena's ownership, residence, operations, utilities, or access to the property may trigger permanent forfeiture of all remaining trust benefits tied to the Hart family. That landed where warmth could not reach. Permanent. Forfeiture. Richard finally spoke, and the control in his voice sounded strained, stitched together. You are overreaching. No, Adrian said. I am catching up to the truth. Elena looked at her mother then, really looked. Vivian's face was pale, but beneath the shock something uglier moved. Not remorse. Resentment. As if Rose had committed a final insult by seeing Elena clearly. Mason shoved back from the table and stood. This is insane. All of it. She stayed here because she had nowhere else impressive to go. Elena rose too. The motion surprised even her. So did the steadiness inside it. She met his eyes across the wreckage of brunch and holiday pretense. I stayed. Because someone had to love this place when all you saw was a number. For the first time, he had no easy answer. That silence fed her more than anger could. Adrian closed the file. Let me be absolutely clear. No one steps onto that property to alter locks, claim residence, move belongings in, redirect mail, manipulate vendors, or interfere with guest operations. If anyone attempts it, the estate will respond immediately. Richard said nothing. Vivian said nothing. But Mason smiled. It was small. Sharp. Wrong. Elena felt the air change before he even spoke. Not defeat. Calculation. The kind that grows more dangerous after humiliation. He reached for his coat, slow and careless, as though this had all bored him. Then he looked at Elena with a glint that made her skin tighten. Keep the speeches, he said. Keep the paper. By tomorrow morning, we will see who is actually standing inside Callahan House. He walked out before anyone could stop him. The front door slammed. The Olden shuddered once. For a long moment no one spoke. Snow drifted past the windows in soft white sheets. Somewhere deeper in the house, a pipe knocked behind the wall. Christmas light glowed across the floorboards, warm and golden and fragile. Elena should have felt victorious. Instead, a different feeling rose. Warning. Because she knew Mason. He had never been graceful in defeat. He was the kind of man who mistook escalation for strength, who rushed hardest when the bridge beneath him was already breaking. And Richard's silence had been too complete. Vivian's anger too still. This was not over. Not even close. Adrian gathered the papers and turned to Elena. His tone softened for the first time. You need copies of everything. Tonight. Cameras active. Doors checked. No one opens anything alone. Naomi stepped closer at once. I am staying. Elena nodded, but her gaze had drifted beyond them, toward the long front windows where snow blurred the road leading down to the bay. Her grandmother had protected her from beyond the grave. The law, at last, stood where love had stood, and still, in the pit of her stomach, she felt tomorrow coming like a storm over dark water. Whoever her family believed she was, they were about to learn the truth. She was not the girl left behind in other people's plans. She was the woman Rose Callahan had trusted to hold the house. And if they came for it again, they would not find her waiting to be broken. Elena slept less than an hour. The rest of the night passed in fragments. The click of locks being checked twice, then 3 times. Naomi spreading estate papers across the kitchen island beneath the hanging copper lamps. Adrian calling just before midnight to confirm copies had been filed, notices had been logged, and any attempt to force entry would now carry more weight than family drama. Outside, the wind scraped salt and snow across the windows of Callahan House. Inside, the old inn held itself upright with the stubborn silence of something that had survived worse. But Elena knew storms did not always announce themselves with thunder. Some arrived in polished shoes, carrying fake smiles and stolen paperwork. At dawn, the camera alert on her phone lit the dark like a blade. She was out of bed before the second vibration. Naomi was only 2 steps behind her, already pulling on a sweater as they hurried into the hall. Elena's pulse slammed hard in her throat while she opened the live feed. Mason stood on the front path. He was not alone. A locksmith waited beside him with a metal case at his feet. 2 hard-shell suitcases stood near the porch steps. A local patrol car idled at the curb, blue lettering dim beneath the pale winter light. Mason wore a charcoal coat and the expression of a man who had decided to turn humiliation into theater. Naomi swore under her breath. Elena did not answer. She was already moving. The cold struck hard when she opened the front door. Morning light spilled silver over the frozen bay, over the porch railings dusted with snow, over Mason's face, which brightened with satisfaction the moment he saw her. There she is, he said, too cheerfully. Glad you are awake. We are keeping this civil. The officer standing near the path lifted one hand, cautious, professional. Ma'am, I am not here to remove anyone. I am here to keep the peace while a property access dispute is discussed. Property access dispute. Mason had found the one phrase slippery enough to buy him a stage. Elena stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her. Her bare anger burned hotter than the cold. There is no dispute. Mason reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Actually, there is. We have a temporary residential agreement. He handed it toward the officer first. Not toward her. That told Elena everything. The officer scanned the page, then looked up. This states that Mr. Mason Hart has permission to occupy the east guest wing of Callahan House beginning last month. Naomi came to Elena's shoulder, jaw tight. That is forged. Mason gave a patient smile, the kind people wear when they think an audience is already theirs. You can say that. I can say my sister is emotional and changing her story because she regrets helping me. Elena took the paper. The signature was hers again, or a cruel imitation of hers. The wording was clean, cautious, crafted to sound informal enough to be believable and legal enough to be useful. Her eyes moved lower. Utility sharing, temporary residency, mutual family agreement. Every line made her skin crawl. He had not just come to walk in. He had come to plant a version of reality. The locksmith shifted uneasily. Look, I was told there was authorized access. There is not, Elena said, without taking her eyes off Mason. And if you touch a single lock on this property, you will be part of an active fraud report. The man's face changed at once. He bent, snapped his case shut, and stepped back 2 paces. I am not touching anything, he muttered. Good. One lie had just lost its witness. The officer cleared his throat. Do you have ownership documents on site, ma'am? Elena turned, opened the door, and crossed the foyer with quick, steady steps. Naomi was already ahead of her, reaching for the folder they had left by the desk. Tax records. Deed copies. Insurance papers. Utility statements. Booking ledgers in Elena's name. A house could be memory, labor, grief, and love, but in moments like this, survival also meant paper. When Elena stepped back outside, the wind caught at the pages. She handed the officer the deed copy first. He read longer this time. Mason's easy expression tightened by 1 degree. Then the officer looked at the residency agreement again. These do not align. No, Elena said. Because mine are real. For the first time, Mason's smile slipped. Only slightly enough. Then Elena's phone vibrated again. Rear camera alert. Her whole body went cold. She opened the feed. Behind the inn, near the old service entrance by the storage cellar, a figure moved through the narrow drifted path with hurried purpose. Richard. He was carrying a plastic storage bin in one hand and fumbling with a key in the other. Elena did not think. She ran. Naomi saw her face and ran too. The officer shouted something and followed. Mason cursed and came after them, boots striking hard against the frozen ground as they rounded the side of the house into the back lane where the sea wind bit harder and the shadows stayed blue. Richard froze at the cellar door. The storage bin slipped from his grip and crashed onto the stones. Its lid sprang open. A man's folded shirt spilled out first. Then a toiletry bag. A razor. Socks. A framed photo of Mason. Several envelopes with Callahan House written across the front. A bundle of unopened mail bound with a rubber band. A pair of worn slippers. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Then the truth rose so naked and ugly it almost spoke aloud on its own. They had brought props. Not for moving in. For proving he had already lived there. The officer stepped forward fast. Sir, do not touch anything. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mason stopped dead a few feet away, and Elena saw it in his face. Fury. Panic. Calculation cracking apart under daylight. Whatever lie they had rehearsed, this was not how it was meant to break. Naomi bent just enough to read one envelope without touching it. Postmarked 3 days ago, she said. Addressed to Mason Hart at Callahan House. Elena looked at Mason. You mailed yourself into my home. He found his voice in a rush. I was preparing in case we reached an agreement. A fake agreement, Naomi snapped. Richard tried to recover his posture, his tone, his authority. This proves nothing. Family stores things with family all the time. The officer turned to him sharply. At a property you do not own, during an active dispute, while carrying a key and supporting a resident's claim? It proves enough for me to document. That sentence hit harder than any shout. From the back gate came the crunch of more footsteps. Vivian, wrapped in cream wool and outrage, appeared breathless and bright-eyed, as if the disaster itself offended her personally. What is happening? She demanded. Then she saw the bin. Saw the mail. Saw Richard. And the elegant mask she wore so well fractured down the middle. Elena stood in the center of it all, the winter air cutting her lungs, her hair whipped loose by the wind, her fingers numb around the edge of the deed folder. But inside her, something had gone very still. This was no longer about suspicion, and no longer about hints, and no longer about what they might try. They were caught. Not just as bullies, not just as liars. As planners. As trespassers. As people willing to manufacture a life inside someone else's home and call it rightful. The officer took out his phone and began photographing the scene. The scattered contents. The door. The key in Richard's hand. The envelopes. Mason's suitcases still visible from the side path. Then he straightened and looked from one face to the next. Let me make this clear, he said. His voice was calm, but it carried like iron. No one enters this property. No one alters a lock. No one moves items inside. No one claims occupancy here again without a court order. Any further attempt will be treated as unlawful entry. No one argued. Even Mason knew better now. The sea crushed faint and cold beyond the bluff. Snow moved across the yard in thin white ribbons. Behind Elena, Callahan House stood tall against the morning sky, its windows catching the first hard gold of day. She looked up at the inn and felt, beneath the shock and rage, something deeper begin to rise. Not relief. Recognition. They had spent years teaching her that love meant yielding, that peace meant silence, that goodness meant making herself smaller so other people could feel larger. But this house had taught her something else. To hold.to endure.to remain. Mason had come at dawn thinking he could step into her life and make the lie look real. Instead, the morning had stripped him bare. And as the officer finished documenting the scene, Elena understood with sudden, radiant certainty that this fight had already changed shape. She was not defending a fragile inheritance anymore. She was standing inside the proof of who they had always been. And who she would never be again. By Monday morning, the Christmas wreath was still hanging on the front door of Callahan House, but nothing about Elena felt the same. She stood in the front office with the winter sun pouring pale gold across the old pine floorboards while Adrian spread the final documents across the desk rows had once used to balance reservations, payroll, and handwritten thank you notes. The inn was quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet in the way a battlefield turns quiet after the last charge, when the smoke has thinned and the truth can finally be counted. Every piece was there. Richard's false eviction threat, the forged residential agreement, the email trail tying his office to the invented transfer, the photographs from the back cellar door, the plastic bin packed like a stage prop for a life Mason had never lived, the mailed envelopes meant to fake residency, the officer's report, the timestamps from Elena's cameras. Taken alone, each piece was ugly, together, they were fatal. Adrian adjusted the papers into one precise stack. They cannot explain this away as emotion anymore. Elena let out a slow breath she felt she had been holding for years, not days. Naomi stood near the window with a mug between both hands, watching the bay through the old wavy glass. She had barely left Elena's side since Christmas brunch. Loyalty had changed shape inside Elena because of that. It no longer looked like blood. It looked like witness. Like presence. Like the people who stayed when staying cost something. Adrian slid one more folder toward her. This is the final estate determination. Elena touched the edge of it but did not open it right away. Her fingers trembled once, then stilled. All morning she had imagined this moment as triumph. Clean. Bright. Vindicating. But now that it had arrived, it felt heavier than victory. It felt like standing at the edge of a door and knowing the person who should have opened it for you was gone. She opened the folder. The language was formal, exact, impossible to soften. Based on documented attempts to intimidate, misrepresent, fabricate occupancy, and interfere with the lawful owner of Callahan House, all remaining benefits designated to Vivian Hart, Richard Hart, and Mason Hart under the Callahan Family Trust were permanently revoked. Permanently. Revoked. The words did not shout, they ended things. Naomi lowered her mug. That is it, then. Adrian nodded. That is it. For a long moment Elena said nothing. She only looked out past the desk, past the polished banister, toward the dining room where the first blow had landed. She could still see the candlelight shaking on the white tablecloth. Still hear Richard's calm voice trying to make theft sound reasonable. Still feel the old instinct rising in her then, the one that had shaped so much of her life, the urge to explain herself gently enough that other people would forgive her for defending what was hers. That instinct was gone now. Not wounded, gone. What happens to the money? She asked. Adrian's expression softened by a fraction. Rose anticipated that question too. Of course she had. He turned the page and read the final instruction. Any revoked distribution from the trust would be redirected, in equal part, to the Cedar Hollow Public Library Preservation Fund and to a local housing program for older women at risk of displacement. Elena closed her eyes. That was Rose. Completely Rose. Even in punishment, she had chosen protection. Even in judgment, she had chosen shelter. She had not built her final act around revenge, she had built it around truth. Naomi laughed once through sudden tears. Your grandmother really did know everyone better than they knew themselves. Elena smiled, but the smile shook. Then her phone lit up. Mason. The name burned across the screen like a match. Once, twice, a third time. She let it ring out. A minute later an email arrived from Richard. The subject line was elegant, measured, absurdly controlled. A plea dressed as accusation. He wrote that the family had been misunderstood, that legal escalation had become regrettable, that Elena was choosing paperwork over reconciliation. She read it once. Then she typed a single reply. No, Rose chose long ago. I am only the one who refused to betray her. She hit send and felt something ancient unclench inside her chest. By afternoon, the locksmith came back, this time by Elena's request. He changed every exterior lock while Naomi updated booking notes and Adrian finalized notices with utilities, local vendors, and the town records office. Every practical task carried a strange tenderness. New keys cut in bright metal. New signatures filed. New boundaries named aloud. It was not just security. It was restoration. Later, when the work was done and the sky had gone silver blue over the bay, Elena climbed the narrow steps to the east guest wing, the very place Mason had tried to claim with forged paper and mailed lies. She stood in the doorway of the front room and let her gaze travel slowly over everything she had saved. The white curtains she had washed by hand, the brass lamp Rose once found at an estate sale, the cedar wardrobe with the tricky left hinge, the quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the water beyond the glass, cold and shining. This inn had never been grand in the way greed respected, it was grand in the way memory survives, in the way labor becomes loved, in the way a home keeps the fingerprints of the people who protected it. Elena crossed the room and set a framed photograph on the mantel. Rose, smiling into the wind, one hand on her hat, the bay flashing behind her like broken silver. For a while, she just stood there. Then she went downstairs, flipped the sign in the front window from closed to taking new reservations, and opened her notebook. At the top of the page, she wrote the plan she had once been too tired, too doubted, too interrupted to begin properly. Callahan House Artist Winter Residency, small workshops, local food evenings, storytelling weekends, music by the fire, rooms restored one by one, with care. Not profitable in the hollow, hungry way Mason meant profitable in warmth, in beauty, in staying powered, in the kind of future built by hands, not hunger. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. Naomi came in carrying fresh bread from town and dropped it on the counter with a grin that looked almost defiant. First guests for New Year's week just confirmed. Elena looked up. For the first time in days, she laughed without bitterness. The sound filled the front hall, rose up the staircase, and disappeared into the old beams of the house that had nearly been turned into leverage, collateral, a lie. Not anymore. Callahan House was still standing. So was she. And if you have ever had to fight for something people called too small to matter, tell me this. What would have broken your heart most? The envelope on the brunch table, the forged signature, or that plastic bin at the cellar door? Leave your answer in the comments. And if stories like this one stay with you, like this video and subscribe to Waters Payback, because some victories do not roar, they endure.